point of this is for us to get our feelings out, and hopefully we can have productive discussions and helpful conversations and build a community for other people that are going through certainly a similar thing, but also just a hard time.
Hey everyone.
Hi.
I'm Haley.
I'm Emma.
And this is the Not Us podcast. Thanks for listening.
Feel like there's no better way than to start from the beginning.
Very beginning.
All right. So last April of 2024, Haley and I were both in New York. I received a phone call on a Friday morning from my mom, which is sort of weird. Like sometimes she calls in the middle of the day, but every time she calls me in the middle of the day, if I'm at work, I'm like, don't fucking call me at work. Like send me a text. If you're having a problem, just text me. Mm-hmm. So I didn't pick up because I was on a call and I figured it was just one of those like regular, she just wanted to check in. Well, exactly, because she didn't send a text. So I'm like not really thinking about it, but in the back of my head, I'm like, that's a little weird. Like maybe something's up. Who knows? So I call her back and she's panicking. And if you know our mom, she's always sort of like putzing and doing weird stuff. Yeah, she's always floopy, but she's never fully panicked. Like this woman doesn't get scared. She gets weird, but she doesn't get scared.
She's not a scared person. She's very, very tough.
Yeah, no, she's tough as nails. So when she called me, I could hear the panic in her voice and I immediately knew something was wrong. And she's basically like, I think Dad was in a car accident, but I don't know where he is and he won't answer my call. And I was like, well, okay, what's going on? Like, you have Find My Friends. Where is he? And she's like, he's 30 miles away in Lynnfield, Massachusetts, which is not anywhere near where we live.
There would be no reason for him to ever be in that town.
No reason. So I'm like looking at him on Find My Friends. I'm calling him. I'm trying to get him on the phone. And she keeps telling me he's answering my phone calls, but he's not saying anything. And at this point, I'm like, oh, someone kidnapped Dad. Like, I guess it's not kidnapped if you're an adult. I'm like, someone's like, he's been super abducted. Like, he's totally abducted. It's a carjacking. Like, that's what's happening. And I finally get him on the phone. And he's like, he sounds like he's in another universe. It's sort of perpetuating my carjacking theory.
No, the way you described it to me is like, I am imagining someone has a gun to his head being like, speak slowly exactly and talk like this. Like that is
exactly what I thought. Because he basically gets on the phone and it does not sound like, it sounded like he was in a trance. And he's like, I'm fine. I got in an accident. I didn't hit my head. Like he kept saying, I didn't hit my head. And I'm like,
ironic.
Bitch, I didn't ask if you hit your head. Like I said, where are you? And he kept saying, I'm fine. I'm with you. And I was like, oh God, well, I'm in New York. So that's not right.
You're not in the car.
Yeah. I was like, it's Emma. So we know something's wrong. And we find out somehow, like I'm on Find My Friends. My mom figures out somehow he got in a car accident and he's in a tow truck. Like she got that much out of him. They're in a tow truck and he's towing him back to a certain place. Like we sort of were able to track him on Find
Honestly,
My Friends.
Thank God for Find My Friends.
Thank God. No, he'd still be in Lynnfield probably a year later. But anyway, so all this is going on and my mom's like, I'm going to get in the car and try to find him. Can you call the police and tell them to like send an ambulance? It doesn't sound like he's okay. And I'm like, all right. So I get on the phone with the police. They're super confused why I'm calling about an incident in Boston when I'm in New York. So I have to sort of explain all of that to them. But they were super great. I guess it was sort of fight or flight. And I guess I went into fight.
You and Mom like really truly saved his life. And the way that you guys handled it and the tracking and phone calls and being so helpful even when you were in New York is crazy to me. But I'm just grateful that you guys were able to figure it out and help him.
Yeah, honestly, I almost like blacked out the experience. Like I sort of have to really sit and rack my brain to like get back in my apartment, like on the phone with the cops trying to figure out what's going on. But anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm on the phone with them. They've sort of figured it out. We figure out was towed. He basically got in a car accident, convinced the people in the accident that he was fine, even though he was acting and talking all weird.
But like, it's not like they know our dad.
They don't, right. So like they could have just thought.
They just thought he was a freak.
Yeah. Which, whatever. Like I'm sure they deal with freaks all the time. So we figure out he's like at this towing yard, like somewhere in Boston. And my mom's able to get there. I'm able to get the ambulance there. My mom beats the cops there. And now like we're both sort of out of the situation. Like it was out of our hands. This is all from my mom's lens. I guess she got there and my dad was just standing in the middle of a parking lot and
like sort of the dirt patch near a rest stop, like a place where you'd pull over on the side of the road and go pee.
Yeah.
Is how I picture it.
Yeah.
Deer poop on the ground. She really talked about the deer poop.
Our mom made sure that we knew that it was like dirt and there was deer poop.
And she's like standing with like backpack slung over one shoulder, just like staring off into space is how she describes it.
Yeah. Like he looked like something was very wrong.
And he wasn't responsive in the sense of like she was saying his name. She was saying Doug, and he was staring straight ahead.
Yeah.
Obviously very freaky. I mean, I think I can't imagine that, but she then describes that once she got to him and like touched him, like grabbed him, that he hit the ground and started having a very aggressive seizure.
Yeah.
Foaming at the mouth. Sort of how when I picture a seizure, a Caesar salad.
When I
picture someone having a seizure, like in a movie, that is how my mom describes it. And I think it was just like
convulsing.
Like she was holding him, like caught him on the ground, honestly. Like, I don't know.
Like he would have hurt, like he was moving, like convulsing. He would have hurt himself if she hadn't been able to sort of like
catch him down too.
In like a lock or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's going on. The ambulance gets there like pretty soon after. He gets in the ambulance and he goes right to Boston Medical. Which was the closest hospital. It's a trauma hospital, and they knew he'd been in a car accident. He gets in the ambulance, and they basically induce him into a coma, a medically induced coma, right?
Yes, to stop the seizures from happening, basically.
Yeah, to stop him from seizing. They needed to intubate him so he could breathe, make sure he was getting oxygen. I guess this is like standard ambulance procedure. I've never been in an ambulance. Like, I don't know.
I have.
Where I know, because when you had the stomach flu, and you said, call an ambulance.
I had the neurovirus and we called an ambulance.
I don't think you should tell people that.
What?
Because it's embarrassing.
So, in the ambulance, were you still on the phone with mom during this? Like,
no, so at this point, I basically was only responsible for like locating dad and then sending an ambulance. But I didn't even know like about the seizure or anything until hours and hours after. Like I was basically like, oh great, she found him, we're good. But I hadn't heard from her. And then it probably felt like hours. It was probably like 1 hour. She called me or texted me and was like, dad had seizure at hospital. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, okay. So we get in touch with her enough to know that they're at the hospital. He had a seizure. And we're like, this feels bad. This doesn't feel like...
Also, like, our dad isn't someone who has ever had a seizure. He's not epileptic. It's not a common thing. You sort of, your mind goes, I think both of us are people who sometimes think the worst.
Well, and at this point, too, it was also made clear that he had driven 30 miles in the wrong direction.
Like something was up.
Something was up. Like we didn't know why he got there, the whole thing was weird, and it was giving like something's wrong. Mm-hmm. So I was in New York with my husband. Haley was...
I was actually at my alma mater, our alma mater.
Right.
At Colgate. It was a good friend of mine who's a year younger. It was her birthday, so we went and surprised her. But like very uncommon, random weekend that I would go to Colgate. And we were there. So my mom knew that I was celebrating a birthday. She knew I wasn't in New York with you. So I think she did not tell me until a little bit later. And she just called me, or she texted me and was like, can you talk? And I was getting ready to go to dinner. And she just called me and was like, hey, again, could tell something up in her voice. Not fear, but like a little bit maybe.
Just something's wrong.
Something's wrong. You can tell.
Yeah.
Like any phone call. And she was just like, Daddy was in an accident. Obviously, I started hysterically crying. I'm like, what the fuck do you mean? Tell me more. And she's like, we don't really know. He's okay, but he was in an accident and we're at the hospital. So I obviously, like, she's sugarcoating it for me.
She's underplaying this because she
didn't want me to feel like I needed to come home. She didn't want
us to feel like right, that's exactly
But then I got off the phone with her, immediately called you, and you were like, Haley, come home.
Yeah.
Which I'm glad you did.
There was enough things that were going wrong that it felt like, I mean, we weren't going home thinking like, oh, our dad was in a crazy car accident and he's going to die. Like, that's not what we thought. We were just sort of like, something's wrong. We want to be on the ground of whatever's happening.
I kind of thought he might be dead.
Really?
At one point.
I don't really like even remember.
I think I blacked it out, but I just remember, so I flew out of Syracuse and met Emma and her husband Will in the airport, and then we went home together, and I just remember like in the Uber drive and all in the plane, I just was like silent, like staring, crying.
Oh, you know what?
But I was sort of in shock.
I didn't even tell you this before you flew, but when mom called me and after was talking about the seizure and was like, we're at the hospital, we're figuring it out, she said they scanned his brain and they saw a mass in his brain. She actually didn't even say that to me. She was on the phone with Will. and Will was on speakerphone. She was talking to him because she didn't want me to even hear that. So I heard that because they're on speaker and he was in the room next to me.
And you lost your mind.
And I was like, I lost it.
It's also just so crazy how we had no fucking idea what was going on.
No.
Like, the doctors didn't know what was going on. It was a mystery. It was very freaky, the unknown. That's so anxiety provoking, but also just like, is he okay? Is he awake? Is he still have a tube in him? Like, what the fuck happened?
Well, like, why does he have a tube?
Yeah.
Sure. A lot of questions. So we fly to Boston, Haley from Syracuse and Will and I from Manhattan. We get there, we immediately go to the hospital, and our dad is in the ICU intubated. Like, he still has tubes. It's not like, it was scary to see. It was sort of like, the whole thing was just very surreal and very weird. And we get there and they're about to take the tubes out. They're like, he's conscious. We're
like, he had the tubes in, but I remember we both grabbed his hand. He looked at us, squeezed it.
Yeah, he was aware and awake, but it was crazy.
But he was like freaking out because he was like, what is this? Like,
yeah,
why is this
and he couldn't talk because he had the tubes. And he's very like, he's not that like there's anyone that you would want to intubate, but he's not the candidate for that. Like, he was very thrashy and upset and didn't want to have a tube down his throat. I mean, who wants one? So
no, but he especially didn't want one.
He's like the last person who would want a tube down his throat.
The last person I would choose to
least tubed. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, he gets there. They're about to take the tube out. So they do that, and
I left for that. I couldn't watch it.
So they take the tube out, and I swear to God, our dad likes a bunch of stuff, but one of the things that he likes a lot is modern day rap culture. I think he
loves rap.
He loves rap. He loves like Ratomi Kwan, R.I.P. We lost a good one this year. He loves Drake. Like, I think he's fascinated by it, and it's sort of like he makes fun of it, but he really loves it.
He does. I also think it started off as a joke, like to be like funny for us because we like rap, but he
fell into it. He rapped too close to the sun.
Yes, like he had made a playlist for me, and there's just Ratomi Kwan on it.
Right.
And then also
it's like Neil Young and Ratomi Kwan.
Like Led Zeppelin, Ratomi Kwan.
But anyway, the reasoning for explaining that is they take the tubes out, and I shit you not, he grabs my hand and he goes, "You know what to do with the money when I die." And I was like, "What? Like, what are you talking about?" And he goes, "You know where the money is." He's like, "Put the money in the grave." Like, he's trying to quote this Drake song. I'm like, how about, "Hey, I'm awake. What happened? Like, what's going on?"
Also, and like, the reference of death, too. Like, you're literally, like, in the hospital and we don't know what's going on.
He goes straight to Drake. He's like, "Emma, put the money in the grave."
And he's dead serious.
No, he was not kidding. It was, my first reaction was like, oh, he's still him. Like, nothing's changed. Like, he's got the sense of humor. He's ripping the jokes. Like, in that moment, I was like, oh, we're safe. Like, we are good. We are safe. Little did we know. But anyway, so this is day one in the hospital. He's dropping Drake. He has to stay there overnight, and one person's allowed to stay with him. So my mom had stayed the night before. I got to stay that night.
He was still in the
ICU.
ICU, yes, at this point.
He's still in the ICU, but the next day he got moved to a room. And again, they had looked at his scans, and they were basically like, we see that he had a seizure. We think that he was having seizures leading up to what they call the grand mal seizure, the big seizure. They think he was having petit mal seizures, so little seizures that the body doesn't really register, but that are going on with the neurons in the brain. Their hypothesis was that he was having these little seizures, and that's why he drove 30 miles in the wrong direction, didn't know where he was acting super weird in the car, and that's why he got in the accident.
Yes. And that explains, like, he doesn't remember it at all either. Mm-hmm. So the accident on the phone with you being like, "You're with me," like all that would make sense if he was having obviously some unusual brain activity.
Yep.
Which they sort of concluded that's why it happened. Also, he had no injuries pretty much from this accident, which is such a blessing because his car was completely totaled.
Oh no, don't you remember he like hurt his pinky finger?
His
he was really upset.
Pinky nail was like black and blue a little. And every 5 seconds he'd be like,
"Oh, my hand, my nail." And we were like,
I was like, "Dude, you could have like had your head chopped off," and we're
also like, they're telling you you're having seizures, and he's like, my pinky. Like, this guy, he's a little dramatic. But
he's gonna hate that.
He's gonna hate that. But anyway. So it's day 2 in the hospital. He gets moved to another room, and we're basically like, all right, like, weird that he had a seizure. Maybe he has epilepsy. We're not sure what's going on. They're doing all these scans.
I thought like autoimmune for a while.
That's what
that was
they
something
thought. They were
thinking.
looking at infections, which can cause seizures. They were looking at autoimmune disorders. They were looking at like neurosarcoidosis, which is some other autoimmune-esque thing that could cause seizures. They scanned his entire body, and I guess it's really difficult to see what's going on in the brain from an MRI because of just all of the regular brain activity going on. So they scan his entire body, and they see a nodule, as they were explaining it, in his lung. So the theory after like a day is
lung cancer.
Right. They're like, maybe he has lung cancer and has this weird phenomenon going on where the cancer in his lung is sending messages to his brain to cause inflammation in his brain. What they could tell at this point is his brain was super inflamed, and they're just like, how many seizures were there? What was happening with the seizures? Why did they happen? Like, he's on all of these steroids, he's on all these medications to make sure that he's not having big seizures again.
But he is having still this activity.
Right. So after a day in the hospital, we thought he was going to get to come home, but they revealed to us that he is still having seizure activity in his brain. And that was sort of the weird, we were like, oh, so we've just been sitting here at the hospital hanging out with him, and he's still having these small seizures.
And like, it's crazy to think about that. We just didn't know.
Right.
But you can't really tell.
And he didn't know either. Like, you can't, like, there were some moments where he was like a little weird, but we were like, hey, the guy just got in a car accident. We did think that he had hit his head because he was being strange. And like, he's in the hospital. Like, it's disorienting. It's disarming. It wasn't a big red flag that he seemed off.
Also, you were saying how his brain was very inflamed and it was very swollen. And it was sort of like the chicken or the egg conversation of, okay, is his brain swollen because something's wrong and that's what caused the seizure? Or is his brain swollen because he hit his head and the seizures are making his brain swell? Like, it sort of was a back and forth for both.
Right.
So that was hard. I don't know. It was hard to understand what caused this, and they didn't know, but we had to wait for the brain to stop swelling, but he was still having this activity, which was making it swell. So
yeah,
a whole ordeal.
At no point, though, was anyone like, oh, it's like probably brain cancer. Like, we really hadn't been thinking about that. We had actually celebrated that it wasn't brain cancer.
Was that after the second night?
After the second night, the guy in the ER was like, oh yeah, like, don't worry, doesn't look like there's cancer in his brain. We like literally, we went to our favorite Asian fusion restaurant, Myers and Chang, shout out.
So good. Amazing. Oh, I want it right now.
We went there and we cheersed and we were like, thank God it's not brain cancer. So, I mean, that didn't age well at all. It feels like we could talk about this beginning of what has now been this long journey forever, because our dad was in the hospital for 12 days. We were there for the majority of the time. Our other sister came back for a good amount of the time too. And those 12 days honestly felt like an eternity. Like, we would wake up in the morning, go to the hospital, try to get in early, bring food, go for it just felt like time was standing still. Nothing was happening outside of what we were doing. And it
sort of was standing still for us. Like, we were both barely working.
It was the whole, we kept waking up and thinking like, oh, maybe we're in a bad dream and this weird shit isn't going on.
And all of us were literally losing our minds sitting in a hospital all day. Like, we were like, I don't even
anything. Like, we were just like all of the doctors thought we were absolutely insane. We were waiting for them to like,
we were being very out of
the
pocket.
psych ward. Yeah, it was a lot. But anyway, so we're there for 12 days. They're trying to get his petite mal seizures under control. He has like all these nodes attached to his head. He's going through all these tests, these cognitive
things. They put
things.
An EEG, so it was like all the leads on his head, tracking his brain activity, and he had to carry around a little sack.
He looked like a genie.
We called him the genie. I wish we could show a photo, but he would not like that, so we're not going to.
Just, you can imagine it. But
yeah, like with the little cat, a genie, if you've ever seen Aladdin.
Yeah, he looked
the genie.
Like the blue genie, but a man in a hospital. In a blue gown.
A blue gown, there you go.
Anyway, so all of this is going on. After 12 days, they're like, all right, we put in all of the tests for all of these different things that we think it could be. The leading theory was that it was lung cancer, that they were like, oh, we can take that out real good. Like, that won't be a problem. So we were sort of thinking, like, we left the hospital. They got the seizures under control. He was on a ton of, and still is on, a lot of anti-seizure medication, a lot of steroids to help the inflammation in the brain. They got everything under control, and they were basically like, wait for the tests to run, and we'll let you know what's going on. And one by one, all of the tests start coming back negative. They're like, all right, it's not the neurosarcoidosis lung cancer thing that we thought it, or that one was called like parasympathetic something. I don't remember that.
Paraneoplastic syndrome.
Great. Good job. But they were like, it's not paraneoplastic syndrome. It's not autoimmune stuff. It's not an infection in his spine. And
it's sort of weird to hope that it is that. But we were. Like, I remember
Right.
being like, shit, what do you mean he doesn't have cancer in his lung? I thought he did.
No, we were hoping for that because it was an
for
answer.
autoimmune. We were hoping for any answer because that unknown sucked so much.
Right.
But it's also ironic because I look back now on that time of unknown and I'm like reminiscing on it too.
Right.
Because
Right.
the reality sucks ass.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, we were hoping it was lung cancer and thought it was to the point where, like, we're at this point, this is all happening in April and May. My husband and I got married in June. And I'm like, oh yeah, I don't think we should have cigars at my wedding because, like, my dad might have lung cancer. Like, this was a very prominent theory. So to find out that that wasn't it was sort of like, oh shit, okay, so what's going on?
And then we kept circling back, like, fuck, could this be brain cancer?
Yeah, but it didn't.
In the back of my mind, at least.
In the back of, I think, all of our heads. And our parents were thinking more and more, like, maybe this is worse than what we thought was.
But I'm, like, telling my friends, because they're like, what is going on? I'm like, oh, well, it's not brain cancer.
Yeah, we're like autoimmune
like,
something.
Totally not. Like, we're hoping for this.
Yeah. He's going to all these appointments. They're getting closer and closer to figuring it out. We get through our wedding. It's great. I mean, he's on these steroids. He's doing a great job. He officiated the wedding and also father of the bride did the shit out of our wedding. He did such an amazing job. Like,
it was the best day of my life. I kid you not.
And mine.
But also mine.
Right. Like, we had a ball. He was so great. And he was going through sort of all these tests. And I think right before the wedding, he had gotten news that it might be cancer in his brain, but he chose, probably smartly, not to share that with us.
But didn't even share with our mom.
No, he didn't share with anybody.
I just can't imagine the weight of holding that and the fear of holding that alone that he was carrying on such an important day where he was running the wedding. Oh, it's probably had the second most important job other than you.
It arguably the most important job. Like, it was the most selfless thing to,
like, breaks my heart to think about.
Me too. To have kept that to himself and not said anything to any of us so we could sort of carry on with our, like, amazing weekend and not be thinking about that. Like, it's, when I think about, like, going on my honeymoon after my wedding and being on such a high, meanwhile, like, dad and mom are slowly figuring out all of this stuff, I'm like, I'm so happy that I got those moments, but I just feel crazy that he and mom and, like, that they were going through arguably, like, one of the worst parts of this whole process while I was, like, having Aperol spritzes and stuff.
But you also, like, had to do that.
So it's post-wedding. They're figuring everything out. And we sort of are, even without our mom or dad saying anything, we're sort of coming to the conclusion, like, we're picking up a vibe that stuff's not looking good.
It's not good.
We're finally about to figure out what's going on. And they've eliminated basically all of the things that could be not terrible. And without, like, our parents calling us and being like, hey, we're finding out tomorrow if dad has brain cancer or not. Like, we knew that was sort of, we could deduce that that's where we were in the process.
Yeah.
He had a brain biopsy right after the wedding, and they were getting the results back of that in, like, the second or third week of July.
I was home. Maybe I was being really naive, but I even was like, there's no way. Like, that'd be crazy. So they went to this appointment and I was just, like, on a walk, like, whatever. I wasn't even home when they came home because I didn't think anything. And then my dad texted me and was like, where are you? We just got back. Hello. And I was like, fuck. Yeah. You can just tell. And then they sat me. I was sitting down at the table and they told me. And that was probably the first time. It was just so denial, I feel like, for a bit.
Yeah.
Like, we were all crying, of course, but it felt fake.
Because we also didn't know what this entailed, really. And basically, the way that it was phrased to us, and I mean, you were there in person. Like, dad called me. I knew that they had the meeting. I was tracking his location again the whole time. Like, I saw him go to Mass General and, like, come back to the house. And I was like, oh, he's at the house. Like, they must know what's going on. Like, I should call them and figure out the news. The way the information was passed to us this week in July was he has cancer. There are a couple tumors in his brain. They're slow growing, but it's grade 4, and they're referring to it as glioblastoma, which I didn't know what that was. And I was like, oh, all right. Like, I didn't know anything about brain cancer. You look up glioblastoma and it's basically like, all right, if you from the onset of your diagnosis, you have 8 to 12 months to live. Like, that's what
you look it up and it's like, oh, worst and most deadly type of cancer.
I mean, our dad has spent probably our entire lives trying to shelter us and make sure that we're okay. And even in this process, like, he wasn't even really using the word cancer. He's like, yeah, they found a couple of small tumors in my brain. Meanwhile, mom is like, glioblastoma, like screaming from
She's
the
putting
rooftops.
glioblastoma on blast.
Yeah, no, she like updated her Instagram bio and is like, loving mom, wife of man with glioblastoma. It was, but anyway, it's mid-July and we find this out. And I think to wrap this all up, our family, the two of us, our sister Lucy, our mom, and our dad, and everyone else who's close to us, have been spending now the last 6 months since we found this diagnosis, figuring out like, what does this mean? What, like, how does this end for us? And how does this manifest itself in what time we do have left?
Mm-hmm.
We've gone through all of the different stages of just denial, anger. I think there are some days where I think we circle through it just in that one day. We go through all of them.
I circle through them in an hour sometimes.
It's fair.
It's quite scary.
But from the beginning, from the onset of the diagnosis, our dad said, we're going to fight this. We're going to fight this as hard as we can. Basically, we found ourselves to be in a situation where you're being dealt one of the worst possible hands.
Horrible hand.
But with, I guess, a good situation in the sense of,
we're lucky we live in Boston.
Right.
He can walk to his appointment. It's such an incredible medical system there. His team specifically at MGH is so fabulous.
Yeah. Everyone's been amazing, but it's also, at the end of the day, like, he gets glioblastoma and the odds of...
You can't slice that in a positive way.
No.
But there are positive aspects.
Yes, there are silver linings to this situation. But, like, the punchline is, like, this is terminal brain cancer. And I think there are many days where he doesn't fully understand that. We don't fully understand that. We don't want to think about it. We don't want to understand it. Do you want to talk about just his treatment and stuff so far so we can catch everyone up to where we are now?
So he started off treatment doing radiation and also chemotherapy simultaneously. So that was the first step. They went in pretty aggressively. He handled it like a champ. Of course, he's the toughest guy I know. And that was great. Got through radiation, rang the bell, and I were home for that, which was really, he did not want to ring that bell. And then from there, you don't really do radiation multiple times, especially on the brain, just because it's so toxic and it can really hurt the cells that are not cancerous as well. You can't really target it that specifically.
It's high risk, high reward, but because it's so high risk, like, he came out of the radiation and this first round of chemo, they MRI'd his brain, and the tumors that they were targeting had shrunk. Like, they had showed some regression in size. And that, they think, was very much because of the radiation.
More so than the chemo.
Right.
And the brain's just so sensitive. It's like his personality.
It's a superpower.
It's everything.
Like, our dad is
he's smart.
Funniest, smartest, like, most witty. We think we're hilarious. If you think we're funny at all, it's all thanks to him, honestly. Like,
mom's gonna hate that.
I don't care. It's true. But he's like, we've said this forever, his brain is his superpower. He's so creative, so thoughtful, so eloquent in everything he does. So the fact that his body decided to attack his brain is just sort of like...
It's ironic almost.
It's like, I don't want to say poetic justice because that's not right, but it's like...
It all circles back to rap.
It all circles back to rap. It just adds to the what the fuck's going on of this entire situation.
So now, done with radiation, ring that bell. He is still taking chemo, not currently, but it's actually great because it's at home.
It's all
oral chemo, so he's actually able to do it in our house and doesn't need to go in and sit and get an IV. Takes it along with like a million other pills every day. He was on a schedule of taking it 5 times at a very high dose, and then taking a break for like the remainder of the month, sort of once a month around that time. It's just tough because his type of DNA with the cancer is unmethylated, which I don't entirely know what that means.
It's a genetic marker that in other patients has shown to react less positively to chemotherapy. His tumors seem to be slow growing, which is abnormal for glioblastoma.
It's usually quite aggressive, yeah.
Right, but at the same time, it's like that could change on the flip of a hat or whatever that phrase is. So it's sort of, I'm really bad at phrases. It's sort of like we're living in this weird world where we don't know how much time he has. we want to go for quality over quantity to some degree. Like we just want to make the most of whatever we have left. I mean, this is heavy. This is awful. There's no sugarcoating what he's going through and what we're going through. I mean, this sucks. Like front, back, up, down, diagonal. Like it sucks everywhere. It sucks everywhere. And
it blows.
It totally blows. And I think for us, we spend a lot of time with our family members, with our friends, but more than anyone with each other, talking about just our feelings around this, going through memories that we've had with him, just talking about anything that I think will either help us understand and or make us feel a little bit better.
Yeah.
So that, just to sort of wrap it all up,
that's what sort of brought us here.
Right.
We're like, why not put a mic in front of us? And I mean, ideally, this will blow up, spread awareness. People will take comfort in us being pretty vulnerable, I'd say, and talking about how our feelings, our emotions, all of that, and hopefully it will help someone else. But worst case, it doesn't. It helps us.
This is therapeutic for us. So
yeah. So if that's the only thing that comes out of this, like, I'm okay with that.
Yeah. If we need to sit in front of our computer with microphones and talk at each other to make ourselves feel better, like, I'll do that with you all day long.
Oh, that's what we're doing.
Yeah, that's great. In terms of how we want to roll this out, a lot of what we're looking to do is just sort of have conversations that do kind of suck. Everything will relate back to our dad and our relationship with our dad and what we're going through with him as a family and as daughters, and just sort of dissecting those relationships. But a lot of the other topics that we're planning on talking about they'll just sort of run the gambit of everything from relationship to alcohol to birth order. One of us is hungover today. To birth order, to talking about like eating disorders, just talking about things that have touched us or people that we're close with in so many different ways. It's not hard for us to relate everything back to our dad because he's been such a prominent and amazing figure for our whole lives.
I mean, I feel like we have always been doing that.
Yeah.
I'll like see a door and be like,
he loves that.
Doors. Like, it's ridiculous. We're obsessed with
but again, like the point of this is for us to get our feelings out, and hopefully we can have productive discussions and helpful conversations and build a community for other people that are going through certainly a similar thing, but also just a hard time. Because I think there's so much to be said for struggling in general and not having an outlet, or just not knowing that so many other people, whether it's the same struggle or drastically different struggle, are also having a really hard time. Say something that will end it better than what I just did.
Good night. Oh, good night. Thank you for coming to the show.
Dad's gonna kill